Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 168, and we're going to talk about lying in general and then lying in politics as a gateway of monopolies. Yeah, okay. So there's a lot of lying in Washington, D.C., and the reason is because there's just so much temptation to embellish one's own personal record or to just straight up lie. And this is the reason why people do this is that you can take something which is pretty nondescript, something which is boring, something which is very common, and turn it into something special, something unusual, something which warrants more attention. Okay, so politicians do this all the time. So, for example, Waltz, the Harris's VP pick, he claimed to have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and you get this if you were in combat, right? And so he wanted to sort of represent himself as someone who was in combat, who was in harm's way, and therefore suffers as a result. This has the double effect of getting people to sympathize with him and therefore not criticize him as harshly, and also to see him in a better light. Then you have Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren, who claimed to be Native American. And in that way, she was able to get employment at Harvard or a Harvard connected entity. And it was only a few years ago that she took the DNA test to see just how Native American she was. And it turns out she wasn't Native American at all. And I thought that was a very interesting example because you don't take that DNA test unless you really thought that you were Native American. So she was lying without even really knowing it. And then there's that Australian Olympic breakdancer where she went to Paris to represent Australia as the best breakdancer from Australia. Well, it turns out that she wasn't very good. In fact, I tried to watch it. It was so cringe, I had to stop watching it. I normally don't watch that kind of thing, but you can kind of recognize athleticism and talent. So, how did she get to Paris? Well, because her husband was the judge, right? And so, therefore, she lied by embellishing her own ability. But the downside of that, of course, is someone who is far better and underprivileged was denied the opportunity to go to Paris, which is pretty bad if you think about it. She took someone else's place, someone who was much more deserving, someone for whom this was a very, very big deal. Trump himself, he frequently misrepresents his own performance and the state of the economy. Whether this is intentional or not, that's debatable. Maybe it's just he's just repeating what he has heard, what other people say about his economy. But come on, I mean, he did all that stimulus. He was in charge of all the Cervasis lockdowns, all the money printing there, and so his track record on the economy and the American freedom not very good. So you can see by these examples that there are many different types of lying. So they're lying is a huge, diverse category. And within that category, there are different nuances or different forms of lying. So the one that everyone is pretty much familiar with is deliberately saying things which are not true. So you broke the window. Someone says, "Did you break the window?" And you say, "No, I didn't break the window." So that's lying, right? So this is what most people are familiar with. But there's also hypocrisy, hypocritical lying. So you make the claim that killing children is bad, or but you support indiscriminate bombing in other countries. So you know that children are dying in those bombings, but that's okay. So it's not really that you care about the death of children. It's only you are targeting certain situations where the death of children is very, very bad because you have another agenda, and so you're trying to push that agenda along. And in order to do that, you have to pretend that you care about the lives of children. But clearly you don't, because when it happens out of sight, out of mind, it's okay. So that's a kind of lying. And we can go into just how bad that is in another episode. Then there's also lying by repeating bad information that you heard from others. So you didn't know that it was a lie. You thought it was the truth, but you repeat it. That still makes you a liar. There's a scene in Dead Poet Society where a father of one of the students says to his son, "You made a liar out of me." And a lot of people might get upset by that line, but it is an indication of what people in America thought was considered a lie at that time. So by letting someone else believe something which is not true, you're causing them to become a liar. White lies, of course, are lies, so you can't really make an argument there. Another way of lying is by changing goalposts, right? You say, well, if you achieve this level, then we'll proceed. But then you say, oh no, I'm going to change the conditions that we're going to need in order to move forward. Or you can change definitions, right? Like the way you define inflation, the way you calculate inflation, by changing goalposts, rubrics, criteria, definition, you can basically lie, but then say you're not lying, right? And so this is another form of lying, which is very commonplace now in the United States today. So many different kinds of lying. There are probably many, many more, but just off the top of my head, this is what I can think of. Now, why is there so much lying? Lying, most people would consider as a bad thing, like don't ever lie to me, or I would never lie to you. But it happens all the time, and people freely repeat lies, believe lies, rely on lies. Why is it this way? And the reason is because there is very little accountability in society these days. So once upon a time in America, at least, if you lied, it could destroy your career. It could destroy your reputation. It can destroy a business because you lied. But these days, because of the lack of immediate punishment, because legislation is designed to protect people who misrepresent or change the goalposts or change the definitions. And so there's a lot of protection for lying now. The media, the news reporting, investigative reporting, and the like, they're supposed to keep people honest by exposing bad information or straight up lying. But these days, the media are basically just mouthpieces for liars, right? For the government entities that continue to subsidize their companies or pass the legislation which protects their companies from competition, right? So the legacy media, right? ABC, NBC, MSNBC, those kinds of CBS, those kinds of outlets really should be going bankrupt. But because they are protected by legislation, uh, you know, from competition, then competition must find another outlet, and that's why they're going to like Spotify, Twitter, to share the information that they have. And by all measures, they are getting more viewers. They have more credibility than the legacy media. So now that that is eroding, you have things like alternate facts. I've talked about that before. And really, what we're talking about is subjectivity. Because of difference in subjectivity, what you think is true changes. People also have fact checkers, right? But that industry can be easily co opted by people with a lot of money, right? So you pay people to believe and to flag certain things as not being true, but flag other things as being true, which are not. And so it's very difficult to figure out truth or hold people accountable with so-called fact checkers. It would probably be better if a fact checker had nuance, right? So you can say, well, subjectively speaking, this person could believe this, but it is also subjectively true that other opinions are equally legitimate. And so at the end of the day, you have to make a choice as to what to believe. And that's something that I've been saying all this time. And then, of course, you have congressmen, particularly AOC, who says it is better to be morally right than factually correct. I did an episode on that, but that basically is giving a green light for open lying, for unrepentant lying. So you can lie about something, know that you're lying, but it's okay because why you're lying is morally good, right? So the cause that you are fighting, the activism that you're engaging in is so morally good, is so virtuous, it's okay to lie. All right. So lies in society, particularly in politics, politicians to the average citizen, this is made possible by ignorance, right? And this ignorance is made possible by bad education, but not knowing a whole lot allows people to be lied to. You don't have a whole lot of information. You don't have other um, uh, information, systems of thought, principles, which would cause you to be suspicious of information that you are hearing. You have nothing, right? And Jay Leno used to have um, this segment on his show when he would host the Tonight Show. It was called Jaywalking, and a lot of other late night hosts and other people have done the same thing, where you just walk through the street and ask people basic questions, and then all the viewers get to laugh at the ignorance of the people who are trying to answer basic questions that pretty much any adult should know if you're living here in the United States. But very few people would get the questions, would get the right answers to those questions, which basically is indicative of the widespread ignorance in the general voting public. So lack of accountability sends the signal to everybody that it's okay to lie. It's okay to live under lies. There's no accountability, there's no punishment, there's no suffering. And as a result, it happens more. So you have a lot of pontificating. You see a lot of people posturing morally because they believe in a lie. And anyone who disagrees with them, well, they're obviously wrong. They obviously don't know the truth. And so, therefore, they are emboldened to pretty much attack other people who believe other things as true. So, acceptance of lies means that you get to even tell even bigger lies, right? Bigger lies about yourself, bigger lies about other people. So, for example, price gouging, right? I guess Kamala Harris is talking about how she's going to fight price gouging. Now, the thing is, the whole word, the expression price gouging, is an expression of ignorance, right? So you're going to, and we talked about this all the time. I think I've talked about it in a previous episode, but in my classes, I would talk about this all the time. People would get so angry. They were like, oh, but those greedy people and their price gouging. And I would say, well, look, price gouging is, there is no such a thing. In a free society, there cannot be a phenomenon called price gouging, right? Price gouging, that is indiscriminately, arbitrarily raising the price, is only possible in a government controlled environment where there is no competition. Okay. So we all know the expression, the cure for high prices is high prices. So if you have a higher prices, that means it's a signal to other producers that, hey, if you start making this stuff, you can make this much money too. And so a lot of people pile into that industry, which lowers the price, right? So basically, prices rising and falling are an indication of supply and demand. It's very, very simple. So when you control the price, then now you have price gouging, right? So there is no competition. So if one person, one company arbitrarily raises their prices, all it takes is one other competitor to either lower the price or keep the price the same. And when that happens, the price gouger or the person who raised their prices arbitrarily, they lose all of their customers, they lose a lot of money. And so therefore the idea of price gouging just wouldn't exist unless you had no competition, right? And lack of competition occurs because of government over-regulation. Okay, so lying in on the part of government leads to the creation of monopolies. So people, politicians generally lie about prices, right? They say, oh, it's just so outrageous how the price of these drugs or the price of the tickets or the price of this and that. And so they said, I will save the day. I will regulate the industry, which basically means they're going to dictate what the prices are going to be. And so dictating the prices arbitrarily high basically means that you create very few customers. If you set the price too low, then what happens is, most people can't stay competitive that way. So when the government passes laws to dictate what the price will be, high or low, a lot of people just simply can't compete. They can't outlast the duration of the regulation, and so they go bankrupt. One example would be the rail industry. So I was reading that, like I always knew that it was just kind of unusual that we only have one rail company, at least that we know of here in this part of the country. There's a local rail company, and then there's a national rail company. And there's just two, one for each. And I thought that was kind of interesting, right? And so the golden age, especially if you do any kind of US history, you know that there were many, many rail companies all across the United States. And so the golden age of the rail industry was 1880 to 1920. And the more you think about it, the more you realize that those dates are very significant. The ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, was formed in the late 1800s to sort of address all of um, the prices that rail companies would charge its customers. And so they were, meant to control prices, but no one paid attention to them. Right. And the reason why people didn't pay attention to them is because there was so much competition between companies that they really didn't need to listen to what the ICC was saying. But, in the 1920s, they started getting more power, right? Prices started getting capped. And so companies which couldn't make enough profit with that capped price, they went out of business. And so the number of railroad companies started to decline after the 1920s. This is one reason why more people are taking to the air rather than train, right? Because the train industry started to become obsolete. And then you introduce a new form of travel, the airport. And so people would start to use that. It's faster, it's safer, it's cleaner. But imagine that the trains that people used to ride in the 1920s were luxurious. There's a train museum near me, in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. And I went to visit it, and some of those locomotives, and you don't see any of these trains anymore, right? Because it's so heavily regulated. And so it's not worth it to maintain or even to have these trains operating in operation anymore. And so think about the ripple effect, right? So you regulate the rail industry, but if the trains weren't regulated, you probably would see faster, safer trains, much more variety of trains, competition among trains for train companies for train fares, right? So you would have less air travel, right? If it only took a couple of hours to get to LA to New York, why would you fly, right? It seems not that difficult. You don't have all of those check-ins and that whole process of driving to the airport and this and that. Just hop on the train. Uh, but because it's so regulated, no one wants to. They're slow, they're not very clean, they're not well maintained, and they don't seem very safe. And so you begin to see the ripple effect of regulation, how it basically leads to monopolies and therefore decline in service and increase in price. This is the general effect of government lying, right? They lie about the reason there's a problem. They lie about the solution. And so through all of this lying, you see the formation of industries where there is less competition, and eventually you just have monopolies. So banks, I don't know if you use the bank a whole lot, but around my neighborhood, there was a tremendous rebranding of banks, right? Banks were being bought out by larger banks, more larger regional banks. And the reason is because of all of the banking regulations that were passed after, the mortgage crisis in 2008. And so they were like, oh, we're not going to let this happen again. And so they marketed it as a bank regulation, but really it was bank protection. And it was bank protection against competition for certain banks because all the smaller competitors were put out of business. Only businesses that had the foresight to see that this was always going to be a possibility and prepared for it are able to keep up and stay in business. But otherwise, if you're just playing the game like everybody else, whenever they make a move like this, whenever they change the rules, then you go bankrupt. Think of net neutrality, for example. I had students complaining about how we need net neutrality, because one company was raising their prices over another company. And I said, well, you got to ask, why are there only two companies competing for your business? And I don't think they quite understood that. But there are only two because the regulations are designed, including net neutrality, are designed as protection for existing companies against new competition. So lying prevents a competition of ideas, right? Because you're going to regulate the existing industry as it is. It makes it very, very difficult for new ideas to break into the scene, for people to talk about it, for people to try it, and for the word to spread about it. And it seems like the only way you can do it is you have to somehow figure out a way and to beat the system by playing in the system. So Elon Musk with his SpaceX relies heavily, I believe, when he first started on government subsidies, right? And so that's the only way you're going to pull it off. Otherwise, your costs are going to be through the roof. So excuse me, that wasn't for his space program. I believe it was for his Tesla, his car company. The SpaceX, I believe he did it outside of the whole umbrella of NASA, which is why he was able to do it for so much less money. But anyway, you need that competition to find those better ideas. You need freedom so that you can suss out what are the lies, what's the better information, is it lie, is it just simply a subjective opinion, or what's another subjectivity which will lead to a better result. So once again, what government does is bad for society, and the solution is always more freedom, more competition, and this will result in a better quality of life for everybody. Especially it will result in more peace and harmony among people, less war. And we always can use more of that. All right, I'll talk to you next time.